Whose numbers are better, Donald Trump's or Joe Biden's? I found 10 charts comparing the Trump presidency and the Biden presidency, and I'm going to share with you who comes out on top. And we're comparing Trump and Biden's inflation, company earnings, employment rate, budget deficit, stock market performance, homicide rate, oil production, illegal immigration, and even their approval rating. Now, here's the bottom line. Very few of these metrics actually really have to matter to you. Now, inflation. You live in a country, it has inflation. It started out, pretty low under Trump, went to zero basically in 2020 to the pandemic, then shot up as the pandemic continued and Biden took over to 9%. There were countries in the Western world that were higher than 9%. There were countries like the ones that we talk about that were lower than 9%. Now they say it's back under 4%. So, okay, you're spending more money. If you are a high earner, if you're a high net worth individual, that's more of an annoyance. Obviously, the bigger issue there is people around you are upset. And they're taken to their politicians and they're saying, you've got to solve this. You've got to cancel rent. You've got to cancel mortgages. You've got to do this. You've got to impose these regulations. You have to go after the companies. And so I'm more concerned about the numbers being high under Biden as a business owner because people are coming for me. And they don't really make a difference between corporate greed of Unilever and corporate greed of some average entrepreneur who's just trying to get by. That's the bigger issue for inflation. Let's look at the next metric, earnings. This is real wages. Went up steadily under Trump, faltered a bit under Biden, started to come back up within 2% of the baseline, basically, which is the day that Joe Biden was inaugurated. You want to have earnings that aren't reliant on any one given country. And so this affects most people with a job. But if you're running a business, you want to diversify your business that you're not just selling to people in the United States. What we do at Nomad Capitalist, we have people who come to us from the United States, people who come to us from Vietnam, people who come to us from Brazil, people who come to us from the UK and Germany and all over the world. And there's more from some countries than from others. But, when something happens in the United States, you want to be prepared. No matter where you're from, you don't want to rely on income from just that country. So are earnings up? Now, sure, your earnings could come from somewhere else, and this could be a reflection that they're down. A lot of people's earnings were down in COVID, which is all the more reason to have diversified business, diversified source of income. I mean, for us, during COVID, being a virtual business, we did relatively well. How is it you're prepared for whatever could happen in your business? To me, that's what this chart's more indicative of. Employment rate, again, increased under Trump, obviously deep dive during COVID, has come back up during Biden. Really, the fact that 83%, I don't know that I follow employment statistics so often. 25 to 54-year-olds, 83% have a job. Okay. Again, what does this mean about the national, health of the political state where the fewer people that have jobs, the more tumult that's going to happen, the more people are going to go against your business. What I really think is people don't differentiate between, $100 billion companies and $1 million companies that entrepreneurs run that have the same problems that the people complaining do. And so for me, unemployment's a problem of what policy changes are taking place. Obviously, it's unfortunate people don't have jobs, although I think what we've seen in the last number of years is people in Western countries like the US don't always want jobs. And so they want you to pay for that. That's a problem. Federal budget deficit, other than 2020, better under Trump. Here's how that affects you. It affects you that eventually the piper must be paid. Who's going to pay for $34 trillion in debt? It's not going to be the person who doesn't have a job. It's going to be you who has some money. And so we could go on and on and on. Homicide rate, a little bit lower under Trump. Stock market did very well under Trump. Now it's come back and stronger over Biden. Here's the reality. These metrics don't necessarily have to affect you. I don't live in the United States, and I can invest in the US stock market. And so I can also invest in other countries' stock markets. And I think that what these articles are presenting is a sort of false paradigm where do you want Trump or do you want Biden? What I want is to go where I'm treated best. I want you to go where you're treated best. And if some loon gets in charge in a certain country, maybe you don't invest in that country's stock market for a while. Maybe you pull back on doing business in that country. But the reason these metrics impact you is because you have all your eggs in one basket in the United States. And whatever country you live in, chances are you have your eggs in that basket as well. The United States, even more so, being kind of an isolated country. Not a lot of Americans are investing in stock markets outside of the country or have assets or business interests outside of the country. And so as a result, whatever happens in the US, your business, your income, your livelihood, your freedom is going to suffer if the wrong person gets into power. I mean, one of the reasons they said the homicide rate went up at the end of Trump's term in 2020 is that there were certain police forces that just decided not to police, and you had chaos in the streets. And okay, so that gets tagged on Trump. I said back then, is that the kind of country that you want to live in, where your cities just get burned and people march through your neighborhoods? Remember, there are people who were defending their property, and they were the problems, just standing on their own property for, why are you in my neighborhood causing chaos? And so that speaks to me more of a cultural shift of, if you're living in a country where the inmates run the asylum, where people can't get jobs, where earnings are down, that may not affect you personally, but it's going to come because, as the U.S. thought, there's no competition around the world. There have been politicians, including right-wing politicians, who've said deficits don't matter, the debt doesn't matter, we're number one. But for how long? There is more competition now around the world than ever before. The countries that we talk about here right now, sitting in Malaysia, no one would have moved to Malaysia 30 years ago. Now plenty of people are moving here to enjoy life, to retire, tax-friendly place, friendly people. The United States and other countries like it haven't caught up to that idea yet. And so the same way the homicide rate, you can go somewhere where the homicide rate's lower. You know where one of the highest homicide rates in the world is? The U.S. is in the bottom third of all countries when it comes to things like violent crime. That means about 2 out of 3 countries around the world are actually safer for violent crime, including countries that a lot of Americans wouldn't think much about. Countries in the Gulf, countries in Southeast and East Asia, countries in Eastern Europe. These are actually statistically safer for things like violent crime. Here's another thing that they compared. Illegal immigration apprehensions at the southwestern border. Not even close. Much lower under Trump. Now, they said in 2019 there was a surge after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. We could talk about that separately. But there was a surge due to the good economy. Plummeted during the pandemic, and then the minute Joe Biden got elected, it came right up. Actually, kind of came right up towards the end of Trump's term as well. Ostensibly, that was after Biden got elected. Another thing, if that bothers you, I think all these problems can be solved geographically. If you want to get away from any of these problems, you can find a place to go where you're treated best. Now, the ultimate one is the presidential approval rating, that actually Joe Biden ends up below Trump at this point in his term. So that's indicative that people are just at each other's throat. Nobody likes anything. Everyone's against the politicians. What I see when I look from afar at the United States is there's this great anger that didn't exist decades ago. There was a great optimism. Now there's a great anger. And so we can look at all these different statistics. The reality is your life isn't driven by statistics. The same reason that you're not worried about the homicide rate in the United States is why you probably shouldn't worry about the homicide rate in some other country. Even in some of the countries that are a little bit more statistically dangerous than the U.S., some of the Latin American countries, for example, I go to those countries. I haven't been murdered yet. And that's probably what you think about living in the United States. You think, well, there's more homicides, but it's not really impacting me. There's more unemployment, but it's not impacting me. Hey, the stock market's impacting me. But you know what? I've made more money in some emerging country stock markets over the last year than I have in the U.S. And so that's somewhat related to my more value-driven investment philosophy. But you can set these metrics wherever you live. Sure, the average American's not going anywhere. Perhaps you shouldn't be the average American. Perhaps rather than sitting and being angry at the different metrics and hoping that your guy gets in and thinking it's going to be solved right away, if you look at these different things, nobody's perfect. If you want to create the best situation for yourself and for your freedom and for your wealth, the idea is to go somewhere that has the metrics that you want, to take your money that has the metrics that you want. If the U.S. stock market isn't doing what you want, don't blame Biden, don't blame Trump. Find a stock market that has more of the numbers that you want. Find a place that's growing faster. If you're worried about, unemployment, obviously here at Nomad Capitalist, we talk to entrepreneurs and investors. But if you're worried about the sociological impacts of that, go somewhere where unemployment's very low. There are countries that have practically no unemployment. And guess what? The cultural, psyche is different. You want to go to places where there's not riots and destruction and people demanding stuff for free? Go to places like the Gulf. Go to Southeast Asia. People are working for a living. That's what they believe in. And so the bottom line is we can compare Trump and Biden, and I know which side most people are on here, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying, what does it matter? Why do we sit around and compare which politician is better than the other when we can merely opt out of that system? Whenever I interview people such as myself who gave up U.S. citizenship and ask them what they think about Trump versus Biden, or who's going to run, or what's this policy going to do, it's like, it's not my problem anymore. I'm living a life where I float a little bit above the surface wherever I live. Maybe I'm more charitably involved, but I'm not politically involved. I don't pay attention to it. And they say, I'm happier than I've ever been. These charts, these graphs, to me, are indicative of the fact that in the United States and in a growing number of Western countries, people are pissed off. I don't know how that's a way to live. I don't know how that's indicative that you're living in the best country in the world. I don't know why you'd want to keep doing that when you can move yourself and your capital to greener pastures. That's what Nomad Capitalist helps people do. If you have $500,000 a year or more in income, if you have $1 million or more in liquid net worth, we can help you get residence permits, get dual citizenship, move part of your money offshore, whether it's into banks or into brokerages and things like other stock markets. We're not investment advisors, but we can help you set up that infrastructure, how to move overseas and dramatically lower your taxes. If you don't like Joe Biden or if you don't like Donald Trump, why are you paying 37% of your income at the top brackets to fund a government you don't agree with, when you could move somewhere else and pay in the single digits or possibly even lower? To me, I'm tired of Trump versus Biden. I'm tired of all the comparisons between. I have realized for years being away from this system and not replacing it by following any other system where I live, this is just a path to misery. It holds you back. Businesses don't grow as much. Everyone I know that's opted out of this system is a heck of a lot happier, and they're a lot more successful than they would have been had they still been studying Biden versus Trump charts.